Do you agree that Donald Trump can be played by foreign leaders like Putin? And if so, does that make you concerned about the security of the United States?
I do. I think, you know, he seems very susceptible to rolling out the red carpet and
if there was quid pro quo between the Trump campaign and the Russian government, if there was, in fact, collusion or cooperation, if they knowingly interacted with Russian officials who were attacking our election in this way, they must have promised something. They must have offered something. There must have been a thank you that they planned to deliver. Those favors might be being paid back in the way the U.S. government is being run now by President Trump.
It has to, and it is whether U.S. policy toward Russia is also changing. That would be pretty powerful evidence that they were working with Russia and that Russia is now getting something in return.
Do we know that the Russians and their security agencies, their intelligence forces, hacked into the DNC emails and dumped them on us?
Yes. You know, government officials have said as much on background. A private firm has investigated it. I've talked to very senior people at the White House about it. I don't think there's any doubt that they have done that. Crystal clear. There's one candidate that says we should look into recognizing Crimea as part of Russia. There's another candidate, Secretary Clinton, that says absolutely not. There's one candidate, Mr. Trump, that says we should renegotiate our relationship with our NATO allies. There's another candidate that says absolutely we shouldn't do that. So I don't think you need to have a PhD in political science like I do to think that Mr. Trump is the preferable candidate for the Kremlin.
And if American policy was going to change for the wrong reason, that is, as a thank you to their intervention in the campaign, obviously that's very problematic.
Actions by U.S. political figures to benefit Russia, right? Things like the Republican Party taking out of its platform that Ukraine should get lethal weapons to fight Russia and fight off those Russian incursions. They wanted change. They wanted change by U.S. political actors to benefit Russia. They wanted actions taken to benefit Russia.
This risk to the country, I think, is that the Russians possess compromising information, what they call compromat, that can influence this president's conduct of American policy. That is something they can hold over the head of the President of the United States. And the American people need to know that our president is acting on their behalf and not acting because he has a fear that the Russians could disclose things that would harm him or his family.
The issue is coercion. The issue is potential coercion exercised by a foreign power over people who are in very powerful jobs in the U.S. government right now, that they are using or that they could use to blackmail, to exert coercion in order to get the United States to do stuff that is not in America's interest, but is in Russia's interest.
Putin has a bunch of objectives, and he's been trying to achieve those objectives. Have to do with America not supporting NATO, America not supporting Ukraine, and America not supporting the European Union. These are all Putin's objectives.
Because Trump was trying to invest in Russia before Putin in the 1990s, after Putin, in fact, nearly all the way up to the present moment. And he's had no success. He did not manage to build hotels and so on in Russia. So that shows how insubstantial his contacts are.
Essentially acting as an agent of Russia and then working for the Trump campaign, changing the platform of the Republican National Committee on Crimea and on NATO to be more in favor of Putin. And all the Putin love that Donald Trump has shown that's raised really alarms in your party.
Putin had probably the most important one was to see if he could get Mr. Trump in the White House as opposed to Hillary Clinton, because Trump would be viewed as far more open to Russian initiatives and their concerns with regard to NATO expansion and otherwise.
On a scale not seen since the Cold War, American and NATO troops are now positioned in Eastern Europe and the Baltic states, close to Russian forces. They are constantly drilling and practicing for what, if it happened, would be a real war. Special correspondent.
Our analysis is that NATO's forces would be outgunned, outnumbered, and overwhelmed in 36 to 60 hours.
I maintain the best way to maintain the peace is through preparation. It's just showing the strength and the cohesion of the alliance and the U.S. commitment to maintaining the peace on the continent.
The U.S.-led battle group's Polish base is 560 miles away. To reach northeast Poland will take the convoy more than a week. The Light Dragoons are now on the way to northeast Poland with the US-led force. They expect to remain there for 6 months and with one aim: to establish what NATO calls an enhanced forward presence in Eastern Europe.
The U.S. plans to allow the sale of lethal weapons to Ukraine for use against pro-Russian separatists. Supporters say it's long overdue. Critics say it brings us closer to a real conflict with the Russians.
Now it will provide weapons to help Ukraine defend itself. The State Department announcing the United States has decided to provide Ukraine enhanced defensive capabilities as part of our effort to help Ukraine build its long-term defence capacity to defend its sovereignty and territorial integrity and to deter further aggression.
This president, at this time, with his national security team, is finally doing what people on both sides of the aisle have tried to get administrations to do. I mean, these weapons are to defend Ukraine against Russia's aggression.
And it is lethal, and it is going to send a message to the Russians, and they're not going to be happy about it.
The Trump administration has approved a plan to provide lethal weapons to Ukraine, a long-awaited move that deepens America's involvement in the military conflict and may further strain relations with Russia. Moscow responded angrily on Saturday. The new arms include American-made Javelin anti-tank missiles, U.S. officials said on Friday. Ukraine has long sought to boost its defenses against Russian-backed separatists armed with tanks that have rolled through eastern Ukraine during violence that's killed more than 10,000 since 2014. The move is likely to become another sore point between Washington and Moscow as President Donald Trump contends with ongoing questions about whether he's too hesitant to confront the Kremlin. The United States, under Obama, also imposed sanctions on Russia for its invasion and annexation of Crimea. The Trump administration has insisted those sanctions will stay in place until Moscow gives up the Crimean Peninsula.
America does not seek an indefinite presence in Syria under no circumstances. As other nations step up their contributions, we look forward to the day when we can bring our warriors home. Promised the world that they would guarantee the elimination of Syria's chemical weapons. Assad's recent attack and today's response are the direct result of Russia's failure to keep that promise. Russia must decide if it will continue down this dark path or if it will join with civilized nations as a force for stability and peace.
A Trump administration has done so far pretty much goes by the Obama administration's playbook. I mean, their idea was the locals provide the fighters, we provide the firepower, and that's how we grab back territory from ISIS.
$400 additional American troops, Marines, and some Army Rangers will join 500 U.S. Special Operations troops already on the ground, with an array of Turkish and rebel forces. Russian and Syrian Army troops are also there.
Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov claims U.S. Special Forces are illegally operating in Syria. In an exclusive interview with Euronews, he said the soldiers are there to support the Kurds. It comes amid reports of Russian mercenaries being killed by U.S. Special Forces in Syria.
They've been there consistently for 2 or 3 years, almost for the whole period that the Washington-led coalition has been working in Syria. And all this time, the U.S. Special Forces and other units are in Syria on the ground, illegally, without any invitation from Damascus or any mandate from the UN Security Council.
Affirming now that the U.S. pilots will not hesitate to defend themselves against any Russian attacks or threats. This after Russian officials warned the United States that any U.S.-led coalition plane or drone flying west of the Euphrates River will be considered a, quote, military target. This threat being in response to a U.S. jet shooting down a Syrian warplane over the weekend.
But no discussion of stamping out this threat would be complete without mentioning the government that gives terrorists all three: safe harbor, financial backing, and the social standing needed for recruitment. It is a regime that is responsible for so much instability in that region. I am speaking, of course, of Iran. What is the purpose of a deal that, at best, only delays Iran's nuclear capability for a short period of time? This, as President of the United States, is unacceptable.
That the CIA has continued to see a stream of intelligence out of Moscow indicating that the Kremlin sees its operation last year, its election interference effort, as an enormous success for all of the reasons that we're talking.
This strategy recognizes that whether we like it or not, we are engaged in a new era of competition. We accept that vigorous military, economic, and political contests are now playing out all around the world. We face rogue regimes that threaten the United States and our allies. We face terrorist organizations, transnational criminal networks, and others who spread violence and evil around the globe. We also face rival powers, Russia and China, that seek to challenge American influence, values, and wealth.
The FBI is trying to get to the bottom of how the Russians were able to not only infiltrate the highest levels of a presidential campaign, but fundamentally get assets to influence policies related to sanctions, related to banks, related to Putin's pockets. It is a very pretty direct connection when you look at it in terms of the policies that have been implemented. And the Trump fawning over Putin, particularly in the last week, 2 phone calls that he made, essentially to congratulate Putin without even once mentioning that there's an election meddling or election concerns.
And we've seen Russia again and again misinform, use disinformation, claiming that little green men went into Ukraine, denying responsibility for the downing of MH17. Russia is known for its disinformation campaigns, and I think this is just another. They claim all kinds of unusual things that we don't agree with. They are the masters of propaganda. I think you very well know that.
What kind of a nation wants to be associated with the mass murder of innocent men, women, and children? The nations of the world can be judged by the friends they keep.